Imagine getting pulled over for no reason, your only crime. The color of your skin and the car you drive. Now picture this, the officer barking orders, trying to intimidate you, not realizing the man he's harassing isn't just any driver, but the head of internal affairs, the very man who investigates corrupt cops. What happens next? It's a lesson this officer, and everyone watching, will never forget. The words cut through the quiet evening like a thunderclap. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the sleek black car, painting the night in chaos. The officer's voice wasn't just authoritative, it was dripping with hostility, almost as if he had already decided the man behind the wheel was guilty of something. The driver, a well-dressed black man in his mid-40s, slowly raised his eyebrows. His hands remained calmly on the steering wheel, his face a portrait of patience. He hadn't been speeding. He hadn't run a red light. He hadn't broken a single law. Yet here he was, pulled over, staring into the cold eyes of an officer, whose tone carried more bias than professionalism. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked politely, his voice steady, measured, and almost disarming in its calmness. But instead of answering, the officer leaned down, his glare sharp and accusatory. "Don't get smart with me. I said license and registration. Move slow, I'm watching you." The tension thickened. The air felt heavy, charged. The man could sense it instantly. This wasn't a routine traffic stop. This was something else. Something personal. Something ugly. He could see it in the officer's body language, in the way his hand lingered near his holster, in the way his tone carried an edge of suspicion. That had nothing to do with traffic law. And yet the man didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He didn't even raise his voice. His calm composure only seemed to irritate the officer further. Funny thing, the driver thought to himself, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. This officer has no idea who he just pulled over. Because the truth was, he wasn't just any man driving home that night. He wasn't just another commuter in a nice car. He wasn't someone who could be intimidated or pushed around by authority abused under the cover of a badge. No, this man was someone whose very job was to hold officers like this accountable. And in a few short minutes, the officer who barked, "License and registration," with such unnecessary aggression, was about to discover he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The black man, dressed in a sharp, dark suit that spoke of quiet professionalism, pulled his car to the side of the road without hesitation. His polished shoes pressed gently on the brake, the car easing to a stop as the flashing lights danced across the glossy paint of his vehicle. He moved with precision, slow, deliberate, almost rehearsed. This wasn't the first time he'd been stopped like this, and deep down he knew it probably wouldn't be the last. He lowered his window with steady composure, the cool night air rushing in. Both hands rested firmly on the steering wheel. In plain sight, because he knew all too well how quickly things could escalate if an officer even thought he was reaching for something. His expression was calm, but inside there was a quiet frustration. How many times had he gone through this exact same routine? How many times had he been judged, not for his actions, but for the color of his skin and the car he drove? When the officer approached, boots crunching against the gravel, the man's voice broke the silence. It was steady, polite, and respectful, carrying neither fear nor hostility. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" The officer paused, his flashlight scanning over the suit, the expensive watch on the man's wrist, the spotless interior of the car. Instead of answering, his lips curved into a smirk. It wasn't the smirk of someone upholding the law. It was the smirk of someone who believed he had power and was enjoying the chance to use it. "You'll find out soon enough," the officer muttered, his tone dripping with suspicion. "Men like you think you can drive around in cars like this and not raise questions." The man remained silent for a moment, studying the officer carefully. There it was again, the assumption of guilt, delivered without evidence, without reason. The suit, the polished car, the composed demeanor, none of it mattered. In the officer's eyes, he was already guilty of something, and yet the man did not react with anger. His silence carried weight. It was the silence of someone who knew more than he was letting on. The silence of someone who understood that very soon, the balance of power in this encounter would shift completely. "You fit the description," the officer said, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. His voice carried that sharp, dismissive tone that didn't ask questions. It accused. His gaze swept over the car, the leather seats, the polished finish, and finally back to the black man behind the wheel. Driving a car like this? The officer shook his head, almost scoffing. Doesn't look like it belongs to you. The words hung heavy in the night air. The man behind the wheel, Marcus, took a slow, measured breath. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't argue. He didn't snap back the way anyone else might have been tempted to. Instead, he just exhaled, letting the sting of those words wash over him like a wave he had felt too, many times before. Because this wasn't new. Not at all. Expensive car, dark skin, that was all it ever took for suspicion to come alive in the wrong person's mind. Marcus could recall countless moments just like this one. Moments where his success, his hard work, his dignity, were all overshadowed by stereotypes. He had heard the same line in different variations. This neighborhood isn't for you. You sure this is your car? You don't look like you belong here. Different words, same poison. But Marcus didn't let it rattle him. Not anymore. He knew who he was, and he knew something the officer didn't, that this entire encounter was about to turn on its head. Still, he chose his response carefully. His calm, level voice broke the silence. Officer, what description do I fit exactly? The question wasn't defiance. It wasn't aggression. It was clarity. But to the officer, it was unwelcome. He shifted uncomfortably, fumbling for vague justifications. His eyes darted, searching for anything that would back up his claim. But there was nothing, no crime reported, no matching suspect, just an assumption rooted in bias. The smirk returned to the officer's lips, though thinner this time. Just answer my questions. Don't worry about mine. Marcus studied him quietly, his face unreadable. Inside, though, he already knew. This officer wasn't stopping a suspect. He was feeding a prejudice. And soon, very soon, that arrogance would cost him everything. As the officer's questions grew sharper and more invasive, the tension began to spill beyond the car and into the street. A couple walking a dog slowed their pace, their heads turning toward the flashing patrol lights. A man on a bicycle stopped across the road, curiosity pulling him into the moment. And then came the unmistakable sound of phones clicking open, cameras ready, recording from the sidewalks. The officer noticed, but didn't back down. If anything, the growing audience seemed to fuel him. His voice grew louder, harsher, the kind of tone designed not just to control, but to humiliate. Answer me straight, he barked. Where are you headed? Who does this car belong to? Don't play games with me. Inside the car, Marcus sat like stone, his shoulders relaxed, his breathing steady, his expression composed. He moved deliberately, almost slowly, as if to remind everyone watching that he wasn't a threat. That composure was powerful. Too powerful. The officer shifted uneasily. Something about the man's calmness irritated him. Most people would have been nervous by now. Most people would have stumbled over excuses, their voices trembling, their eyes darting nervously. But not this man. His silence was controlled, his gaze steady, his patience deliberate. It was unnerving. The crowd sensed it too. Whispered comments began to ripple through the onlookers. Why is he pressing him like that? One woman asked quietly. He hasn't even done anything, another muttered. The phones captured everything, the flashing lights, the officer's rising voice, the calm, silent figure inside the car. The officer's smirk faltered for the first time. He licked his lips, shifting his stance, glancing at the growing audience. Something in his gut told him this wasn't going the way he expected. Still, his pride wouldn't let him back down. Not now, not with so many eyes on him. So he leaned closer to the open window, voice sharp with frustration. You think staying quiet makes you smart? Makes you innocent? You'll talk sooner or later. Marcus finally tilted his head slightly, his eyes meeting the officer's without fear. His lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, calm but knowing. And in that moment, the officer didn't realize it yet. But the power in the encounter had already begun to shift. Step out of the vehicle, the officer barked, his voice sharp and commanding. His hand hovered near his holster, a silent threat, as if he expected trouble. Inside, Marcus gave a small nod, his face still composed. He didn't argue. He didn't protest. He didn't give the officer even the slightest reason to escalate further. Instead, he moved slowly, deliberately, the kind of movements that left no room for misinterpretation. His left hand reached for the seatbelt, Click. He unbuckled it with controlled ease. His right hand pushed open the door wide enough to step out. And then he rose, calm, steady, without a single trace of fear. The officer's eyes flicked down immediately. Polished leather shoes touched the pavement first. Shoes that spoke of professionalism, not recklessness. Then came the tailored trousers, pressed sharply, clean and precise. The dark suit jacket followed, catching the faint glow of the streetlight, tailored perfectly to fit the man who wore it. And finally, his posture, tall, straight, commanding, without effort. Marcus didn't look like a criminal. He didn't look like someone hiding guilt. He looked like a man who belonged in boardrooms, not in handcuffs. The contrast was jarring. The officer had expected nervous fumbling, shaky hands, or maybe an attempt to argue. Instead, he was met with a quiet strength, a confidence that didn't come from arrogance, but from certainty. This was not the behavior of someone who feared authority. This was the behavior of someone who understood it. The crowd watching from the sidewalk leaned in closer. Phones tilted upward, capturing every second. And though Marcus hadn't said a word, his presence alone began to shift the mood of the encounter. The officer cleared his throat, trying to mask his unease. "Hands where I can see them," he demanded. Though his voice lacked the bite it carried earlier, Marcus obeyed again, lifting his hands slightly, not in fear, but in patience. His calm demeanor only made the officer more uncomfortable. It was as if Marcus knew something the officer didn't. And the truth was, he did. Because this wasn't just another traffic stop. This was a test. A trap the officer had unknowingly set for himself. And with every calm, deliberate movement, Marcus was letting him dig deeper. The officer's eyes narrowed as he squared his shoulders, trying to reassert control. "ID," he snapped, his voice sharp and impatient. "Let's see some identification." His hand twitched slightly, betraying the frustration brewing under his tough exterior. Marcus didn't move right away. Instead, he studied the officer calmly, his dark eyes steady and unshaken. The pause alone seemed to irritate the officer even more. "You look nervous," the officer pressed, leaning in closer, his flashlight beam catching Marcus square in the face. "Got something to hide?" Marcus tilted his head ever so slightly, a faint smile forming on his lips. His voice was smooth, even polite, but there was an unmistakable edge of irony in it. "Actually, no. But you seem very eager to find something." The words hung in the air, quiet but sharp. A few people in the crowd let out muffled chuckles, their phones catching every second. The tension was no longer one-sided. The balance was shifting. The officer's jaw tightened. That calm response was not what he expected. He had anticipated stuttering, excuses, or maybe even anger, anything he could use to escalate. Instead, Marcus's steady composure exposed the officer's own insecurity. "Don't get smart with me," the officer barked, his tone harsher now, betraying the crack in his confidence. He extended his hand impatiently. "ID now!" Finally, Marcus moved, slow, deliberate, with the same measured care he had shown since the beginning. He reached into his inside jacket pocket, making sure his movements were visible and unthreatening. The officer's hand twitched near his holster again, but Marcus ignored it. He pulled out a sleek black wallet and opened it, retrieving his ID card with precision. Without a word, he handed it over, his faint smile never fading. The officer snatched it from his hand, eager to reestablish dominance. He glanced at it quickly at first, expecting nothing more than a name and an address he could run through the system. But then, his eyes froze. His expression shifted from arrogance to confusion, and then to something else entirely, fear. Because printed in bold letters on that ID were words that changed everything. Marcus Daniels, head of internal affairs. Finally, after a long pause, Marcus slipped his hand into his jacket pocket and retrieved his ID. He extended it with a calm, deliberate motion, the faintest trace of a smile still lingering on his lips. The officer snatched it from his hand with impatience, almost dismissively, as though it were just another box to check before moving on with his show of authority. His eyes scanned lazily over the plastic card, name, address, picture, routine. But then his gaze locked. His eyes widened slightly, then froze altogether. For a moment, the world around him seemed to go silent. The barking dog across the street, the faint hum of traffic, the whispers from the bystanders, everything faded into the background. His focus tunneled to one line on that ID card. Marcus Daniels, head of internal affairs. The words screamed louder than any siren. His mouth went dry. His chest tightened. The color drained from his face so quickly it was almost visible. This wasn't just any man. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This was the man who investigated police corruption. The man who held the careers of officers like him in the palm of his hand. The officer's hands trembled ever so slightly as he clutched the ID, his earlier confidence crumbling like glass. He looked up at Marcus, really looking at him for the first time. The tailored suit. The calm authority. The piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through him. This was no coincidence. Marcus raised an eyebrow. His voice steady, controlled, and edged with quiet power. Something wrong, officer? The officer swallowed hard, struggling to find words. The crowd around them shifted, sensing the sudden change in energy. Phones tilted higher, recording the exact second when the man in the suit went from suspect to someone untouchable. I didn't realize, the officer stammered, his tone a far cry from the arrogance he displayed minutes earlier. But Marcus didn't flinch. He simply crossed his arms, his calm gaze fixed firmly on the man, who just moments ago believed he held all the power. And now, for the first time, the officer understood. This stop wasn't going to end the way he thought. In fact, it might just end his career. The words hit the officer like a punch to the gut. His stomach churned as the reality sank in. This wasn't just a random man in a nice car. This was the one man every cop whispered about in hushed tones. The one name that could send shivers down any precinct hallway. Internal affairs wasn't just another division. It was the watchdog, the investigator, the judge of integrity. They were the ones who dug through misconduct reports, who reviewed body cam footage, who uncovered the lies behind routine stops. And now standing before him, calm and unshaken, was Marcus Daniels, the head of that very department. The officer's throat tightened. His grip on the ID card felt heavier, like it carried the weight of his entire career. His voice cracked as he tried to speak. Sir, I didn't realize—" The stutter betrayed him. Gone was the confidence, the smug authority, the practiced dominance he had wielded just minutes earlier. In its place was panic, desperation, the sudden understanding that every second of this encounter was being recorded, not just by the bystanders with their phones, but by the sharp memory of the man in the suit. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his eyes unwavering, his expression unreadable. He let the silence stretch, letting the officer stew in his own fear. Finally he spoke, his tone calm but cutting. "Didn't realize—" "What, exactly? That I'm more than the stereotype you assumed I was? Or didn't realize that your behavior has consequences?" The crowd murmured, their whispers growing louder. The shift in power was undeniable. The officer who had begun this stop with arrogance now stood trembling before the very man who held the authority to strip him of his badge. Sir, I didn't mean," the officer began, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him with a simple gesture. "That's the problem," Marcus said firmly. "You didn't mean to realize? You didn't mean to see. You only meant to judge. And now everyone here sees it too." The officer's face burned red, his heart pounding in his chest. He had made the biggest mistake of his career. And Marcus Daniels hadn't even raised his voice. Marcus straightened his tie with a smooth, deliberate motion. His posture was unshaken, his composure unbreakable. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night like steel. "You didn't realize? Or you didn't care?" His eyes locked on the officer, his tone calm but razor-sharp. "You saw my skin, not my humanity. You saw the car I drive and assumed it couldn't belong to me. And now, with every word, with every action, you've exposed exactly why internal affairs exists." The crowd grew restless, leaning in closer. Phones were raised higher, capturing every second in crystal clarity. Each syllable Marcus spoke carried weight. The kind of words people would replay over and over online. "You didn't stop me because of what I did," Marcus continued, taking a step closer to the officer. "You stopped me because of what you assumed. That's not law enforcement. That's prejudice. That's abuse of power." The officer opened his mouth to protest, but no sound came out. His throat was dry, his hands still trembling as he held the ID card that felt like a verdict. Marcus turned slightly, his gaze sweeping toward the onlookers. His voice grew stronger, carried now not just to the officer, but to everyone within earshot. "This isn't just about me. It's about every man and woman who's been pulled over, questioned, harassed, not because they broke the law, but because they fit a description. Because they didn't look like they belonged in the car they drove, or the neighborhood they lived in, or the clothes they wore. The crowd murmured in agreement. A woman in the front whispered, "That's the truth." Marcus's words landed heavy, each one building on the last. Respect should not be determined by skin color. Authority should not be measured by who can shout the loudest. A badge does not give you the right to humiliate. It gives you the responsibility to protect. The officer's head dropped slightly, the weight of shame settling in as the recording devices around him documented his fall from arrogance. Marcus finished with quiet conviction. And tonight, officer, you reminded everyone watching why my department exists. Not to punish innocent citizens, but to hold people like you accountable. The crowd erupted with applause, not cheers of entertainment, but the kind of applause that carried relief, solidarity, and truth. The officer's forehead glistened with sweat, the cool night air doing nothing to ease the heat of embarrassment, crawling up his neck. His earlier arrogance, his sharp tone, his smug smirk was gone. In its place was desperation, a frantic attempt to claw back control he no longer had. "Sir, it was just a misunderstanding," he stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of dozens of eyes and recording phones. "Standard procedure, just doing my job." Marcus took one step forward, closing the gap between them. His calm presence felt heavier than any shout could have been. His words, though measured, struck harder than anger ever would. "No," he said firmly, his eyes boring into the officers. "This wasn't procedure. This was prejudice, and everyone here just witnessed it." The crowd stirred, their murmurs swelling like a wave. Cameras zoomed in, lenses capturing the sharp contrast between the officers' trembling lips and Marcus's composed expression. What had started as a routine stop had become a public trial. One the officer was losing badly. The officer tried again, his hands twitching as he gestured nervously. I didn't mean any disrespect, sir. You have to understand, I thought—" Marcus cut him off with a raised hand. "That's the problem. You didn't think. You assumed. You assumed guilt where there was none. You assumed character based on skin. And you thought your badge gave you the right to treat me like less than a man." The officer's chest rose and fell quickly, his breaths shallow. The more he tried to explain, the deeper the hole grew. His excuses, procedure, misunderstanding, thought you fit the description, all collapsed under the weight of truth. Marcus's voice grew louder now, not angry but resolute, aimed not just at the officer but at the watching crowd. What happened tonight wasn't an isolated mistake. It is a reflection of a deeper problem. A culture that tells some officers it's acceptable to judge first and justify later. But that ends when someone is willing to hold them accountable. The officer lowered his gaze, shame written across his face. He had started this stop convinced he held all the power. But now, standing before Marcus Daniels, head of internal affairs, surrounded by witnesses and cameras, he realized the power was never his at all, and for the first time that night he had no words left. Marcus turned slowly, shifting his attention from the trembling officer to the crowd of bystanders who had gathered. Their phones were raised, their faces intent, waiting for what he would say next. When he spoke, his voice wasn't loud, but it carried with a weight that demanded silence. "This isn't about me being internal affairs," Marcus began, his tone steady and deliberate. "This is about every man and woman who's been stopped, questioned, and treated unfairly, not because of something they did, but because of how they looked." He paused, letting his words settle. The crowd leaned in closer, the night air heavy with expectation. "Because of their skin," Marcus continued, his eyes scanning the faces before him. "Because of the clothes they wear. Because of the car they drive. Because of where they live. None of those things should ever define a person's worth. None of those things should ever invite suspicion." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A young man nodded firmly. A woman whispered, "That's right," while another adjusted her phone to get a clearer shot. Marcus's voice grew stronger, resonant. Respect should never depend on stereotypes. Authority should never be used as a weapon. A badge should never be an excuse to strip someone of their dignity. The officer shifted uneasily behind him, but Marcus didn't turn back. His focus was on the people, on making sure the lesson wasn't lost. "You see, tonight wasn't about a traffic stop," Marcus said. his tone cutting through the silence. Tonight was about a mindset that assumes guilt before innocence, a mindset that sees threat instead of humanity, and the only way that changes is when we refuse to stay silent. The crowd broke into applause, not wild cheering but firm, purposeful clapping that echoed against the nearby buildings. For those watching, this was more than a confrontation. It was a reminder, a warning and a call to action all in one. Marcus gave a small nod, his final words steady and resolute. If we want true justice, then respect cannot be optional. It must be the standard. Every time, for every person. And with that, the lesson was complete. Marcus adjusted his tie one last time, his composure as unshaken as it had been from the very beginning. The crowd was still watching, phones raised high, their whispers carrying the weight of everything they had just witnessed. Slowly, Marcus turned back toward his car, each step deliberate, his polished shoes clicking softly against the pavement. But before opening the door, he stopped. He looked over his shoulder at the officer, no longer smug, no longer authoritative, just a man standing in his own undoing. Marcus's eyes locked onto his, sharp and steady, leaving no room for doubt. "I'll be seeing you soon," Marcus said, his voice low but cutting, each word precise as a blade. He let the silence hang for just a second before finishing. "In a professional capacity." The crowd reacted instantly, some gasping, others murmuring, the meaning of those words clear to everyone present. This wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. The very man the officer had disrespected now stood as the one person who could determine his future in law enforcement. The officer's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard, his face pale beneath the flashing red and blue lights. His chest rose and fell rapidly, the weight of what he had done sinking deeper with each second. No amount of excuses, no claim of procedure or misunderstanding could erase the truth that dozens of witnesses and countless cameras had already captured. His career wasn't just in jeopardy. It was dangling by a thread. Marcus gave one final look, his expression unreadable but firm, before slipping back into his car. The door shut with a quiet click, but the sound carried like a gavel closing a case. He started the engine, the hum smooth and powerful, and pulled away from the curb with the same calm dignity he had carried throughout the entire ordeal. The crowd slowly dispersed, their conversations buzzing with disbelief. "That cop's finished," one man muttered. "He didn't know who he was messing with," another said. The officer remained rooted to the spot, his pulse pounding in his ears. The lights from his patrol car still flashed, but the authority they once symbolized felt hollow now, because deep down he knew the truth. His downfall had already begun. Marcus's car glided smoothly down the street, its taillights fading into the night until it disappeared completely. For a long moment, the block was quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the officer's still-running patrol car. The crowd of bystanders lingered, their phones slowly lowering as reality sank in. One by one, they began to walk away, but the weight of what they had witnessed stayed with them. Because this wasn't just another traffic stop. It was a moment that stripped bare the difference between false authority and true leadership. That night, everyone who had stood on that sidewalk learned something important. Power isn't measured by the badge pinned to your chest or the gun strapped to your side. Real power doesn't come from barking orders or forcing fear into someone else's heart. No, the strongest power comes from integrity, from respect, from the courage to do what is right even when no one is watching. Marcus had shown that in every calm word, every measured action, and every unshakable moment of dignity. While the officer had tried to use his authority to intimidate, Marcus had used nothing but truth and composure to reveal the deeper injustice. As the videos of the incident would later spread online, people would replay his words. Again and again, respect should never depend on stereotypes. It became more than just a statement. It became a reminder of what real justice demands. And for the officer, his night didn't end when Marcus drove away. In fact, it was only the beginning. His earlier arrogance now felt like a heavy chain around his neck. Every witness who had recorded the scene, every bystander who had heard Marcus speak, and above all, the reality of internal affairs. Watching closely meant that his career was dangling on the edge. He knew deep down that accountability was coming and there would be no escaping it. As the crowd finally dispersed into the quiet of the evening, one truth lingered in the air, Authority is not a shield for prejudice. A badge is not a license for disrespect. Justice, respect, and integrity, those are the things that last. And Marcus Daniels had just made sure no one would forget it. And that day proved something powerful. Real authority doesn't come from a badge. It comes from respect, integrity, and justice. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, no matter who they are, then make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe for more powerful stories. And share this video so the message reaches even further. Until next time, remember, true strength is doing what's right.